probably get you to start off by just telling people who you are, because maybe a few people have come across you because you're out there in different forms, aren't you? You've got your podcast going. I've seen you on TED. And mate, do you want to just give a bit of background about what you're up to?
Well, the TED Talk, that was a couple of years ago now, and it's really around confidence, that one. It's called Coffee Shop Confidence. So if you go and watch that, it's a TEDx talk. It's not a TED Talk. But although they can get picked up by TED, of course, and they can end up in the big bad world of hundreds of thousands of views. That one hasn't yet. I guess I'm probably around the 16,000 mark. But that TED Talk, yeah, it was around Coffee Shop Confidence was the title. And it's not just about getting free coffees, as you might imagine. So that might be worth a look for you if you do like free coffees. I've had a lot of feedback from people who've used the idea, the central concept of that talk to get free coffees, but I've used it to achieve a lot more than that. So there was the time that I got a property basically for half price, and yeah, you need to go watch the talk. You'll see what I mean. Happy to take brutal feedback on that. It's not got enough dislikes. You know, when you get likes on it, no, because people think, it must be his mates have gone and stuck those likes on it. The podcast though, it's not directly connected to what I do as a business, but I do host it in the same place. So it's all at myname.com, thorholt.com. The podcast really came around maybe partly for the similar reasons that you started your show, mate. And that was just a frustration that people don't listen to. Never mind, don't listen to facts. They don't listen to even the arguments and emotions from the other side. So you get just people yelling into the wind at each other, or not even at each other, just yelling into the wind. It's the example that's happening right now is this thing around who has Trump stopped getting into America right now. Well, if you just kind of listen to the high-level media messaging coming out, and everybody all over Twitter, a lot of friends and followers of mine on Twitter who are just freaking out about it. Now, if you actually go and start even scrape beneath the surface and look just a little deeper, you find, it was a list that Obama had come up with during his term in office. It's actually only for 90 days. It actually only takes in these countries. It's like, where's the fact? And so that frustrates me. That really frustrates me. And also the fact that people won't listen to other people who somebody designates as too extreme or too... It just enrages me. So I was looking for a podcast that kind of covered that off. And I guess that's what was that was like the genesis behind starting Right With Courage. So I've had all kinds of folks on there, some of them quite controversial these days, like Mike Cernovich was an early interview. Gavin McInnes, co-founder of Vice, who a line he gave me, it was something like whiskey gives it balls, pop makes it funny. He had something about Adderall as well, and coffee cuts the excess off. That was his top writing tip. But who else do we have? Peter Hitchens. Sadly, too late, obviously, to get Christopher Hitchens because we've just been going for about 8 months. One of my favourites, Raheem Kassam, who runs Breitbart London. So he's a Muslim, or culturally a Muslim, brought up as a Muslim. Kind of did some thinking about it at university when he saw, the more extreme members of the faith, and it kind of put him off, and he ended up going right down, a completely different road. He ended up as the advisor to Nigel Farage. They're still great mates. That was one of my favourite episodes. Another one who doesn't get talked about much, Phelim McAleer. Have you heard of him?
I haven't, no.
He'd be one worth you checking out. He did a play about Ferguson, as in what really happened in Ferguson, and he went through, I don't know, hundreds of actors, because when they realised that they were telling the facts from the police reports and the independent witnesses, the actors just couldn't handle the narrative. The fact it wasn't their narrative, that they just couldn't handle it, so they kept leaving, and he kept just having to recast. But he made movies about the Clinton emails on film. I think him and his wife Anne are behind Gosnell, the movie, which is about Kermit Gosnell, the kind of biggest mass murderer in history, I don't even like to go there, but he was aborting babies like quite late term and then like bashing their heads. It's horrific, man. I can't even talk about it this time in the morning. It's horrible. But he's a ballsy guy. That was a fascinating interview. Phelim, Phelim, and then McAleer. He's an Irish guy, but he lives in the States. McAleer. Mischievous movie maker, I build him.
I actually have heard him speak because he was on Ben Shapiro's the Daily Wire podcast, talking about that Ferguson play and all the difficulties, as you said, because they weren't going to, do the media narrative. They were actually going to give the facts on it. Yeah, couldn't even find people to play parts. But that is just a fascinating part of this whole sort of polarization of politics, isn't it? That I think the artistic class, if you like, and that's mainly actors, but it's also musicians. They have not, like the rest of the left, looked at last year and said, maybe we should shut up a bit. Maybe actually the effect we're having is the opposite of the one we think we're having. And they seem to be, as you brought up earlier, doubling down on this Trump Muslim ban, which is, oh my God, you just brought it up. This is a list that Obama came up with. They're running around saying that this list is the way it is because Trump has businesses in the places that are not banned. But on top of that, as you say, it's 90 days. And I think there are over 40 majority Muslim countries in the world. So how's this a Muslim ban? I think you can criticize it for being clumsy, like people with green cards were, badly implemented, sloppy, clumsy. But the outrage is, there's something like 100 people were caught up in this mess, like people who are legitimately have green cards or resident visas for the United States. But the outrage is just all the protesters. That's all it is. It's what's her name, Elizabeth Warren with a foghorn, with a tannoy in the airport and getting a chant going. It's just weird. The left just is apoplectic. And not only that, the thing I learned today was that back in 2011 was it 2009 when the Obama administration figured out that there was a couple of Iraqi jihadists living in Kentucky, Obama put a 6-month ban on refugee intake from Iraq. That was in 2011, perhaps 2009 or 2011. So it's not like, where was the outrage then? I don't remember.
Sorry, mate. There's no logic to it, though, and this is one of the reasons why on my show I don't want to give the impression we only have right-wingers, or there's a few alt-righters, I guess, like Vox Day's been on the show, for example, but it's not just about the right wing on my show. I have left-wingers, right-wingers, Muslims, Christians, atheists. I really am genuinely trying to get opinions from all over the spectrum, but it is fascinating how there's that expression, the left is eating itself, and there is a bit of that. So a fantastic guy I had on, a real inspiration for me personally, because he's just lived his life by this, and that's Peter Tatchell. So he started off in your home country, Australia. There was some guy was getting done for some killing, and Peter worked out he's just convinced this guy couldn't possibly have done it, and he kind of campaigned even then as a 17-year-old to try and get this case stopped, and the guy ended up being, I think he was put to death. I think it was still in the days when you had the death penalty.
Right.
And he's just become a lifelong human rights activist. And he tried to arrest Robert Mugabe twice, like himself and a mate, got beaten up by the guy's bodyguards. He's quite a fellow. And yet, left-wing students in some university in the UK, I can't remember which one now, I have to Google it, they no-platformed him because he'd said something that offended someone. I don't know what the hell he'd said, but you think, well, if a guy as right on as him, who's fought for lesbian, gay and bisexual rights his whole life, he's been a lifelong left-wing activist, if he's getting no-platformed, what the fuck? Well, basically at that point, just left like, really? Come on, guys.
Well, what's her name? God, old feminist. What's her name? She's Australian. Germaine Greer. She got no platformed in the UK because she said that trans women weren't real women. So she's just not. There's certain places on the left now where if you're not left enough, if you're not radical enough, then you'll be you might as well be a right winger. Look, Douglas Murray is gay, but he's the wrong type of gay. Just like Milo Yiannopoulos is gay, he's the wrong type of gay. It's not about when it comes to the crunch, it's not about principles for the left. I think that's the problem. It's about teams. It's about being on the side. Now, there are people on the right that are like that with Trump as well. But this sort of sports team mentality when it comes to politics, and no one seems to have any principles. It's quite astounding.
It's very disappointing, actually. It's not just astounding. I'm genuinely disappointed in human beings in this. I know it sounds a bit grandiose, but I'm bloody disappointed. I'll give you a great example. A guy I had on the show, he's the wrong kind of black guy, I guess, Talib Stark. So he's a black guy. Title of his book was Black Lives Matter rather than Black Lives Matter. And he's a black guy. He's welcome, as far as I'm concerned, he should be allowed to speak his truth. That's what he feels from his experience growing up in some hellhole bit of Philadelphia, according to him. And you just think he ended up in jail, and you just think, well, who are these people that they think they can talk down to him and say his opinion isn't valid? And that they're often not fellow black people. Actually, they're often, I don't know, Owen Jones in the UK. Kind of right on people. I don't know, it is so disappointing, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing with this show, is to try my own little way to combat that. But I guess a challenge I occasionally have is when I go to try and get kind of more left-wing writers on the show, they see some of the people I've had on, like Vox Day, or who would be a good example? I've got a list here. Who would be good? Even Brendan O'Neill, I've had on the show, who winds up a lot of left-wingers these days, and they see it and they're like, oh, I'm not going on a show where he's been on. And you just think, really? Like, what do you just want to be in a world where everyone only thinks like you do?
Isn't that hilarious about Brendan O'Neill? Because Brendan O'Neill is one of the most thoughtful people. When he puts forward an argument, he will quote, John Locke or John Stuart Mill on freedom to back up his claim. I mean, he's not just talking from some right-wing neocon sort of ideological position. I mean, the guy knows his stuff. He backs up his claims. There's no way he's right-wing or controversial. Yet, I actually saw an article today that had controversial speaker Brendan O'Neill to speak at some university. It's like, how is Brendan O'Neill now controversial? All he does is hurt the feelings of people who think they shouldn't have their feelings hurt, that have the opposite opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing that I've seen over the years of, being an interested consumer of speeches, work online videos, YouTube videos, is how a lot of these people are genuinely thoughtful people. They start off as left-wingers, and then towards the middle or end of their career, they basically might as well be right-wingers, like you say, if they believe in freedom of speech. The best example is Christopher Hitchens, who started off way on the left, very rebellious, kind of left-winger, and ends up, most people would call him, I hate the terms left and right, but many people would consider that he ended up kind of selling out to the left and becoming right-wing, depending on how you look at it. Now, I don't. I just think the guy he's an independent thinker, actually.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how many do kind of make that transition. So they've started off definitely on the left for all the right reasons. They believe in human equality, and they believe in, anti-racism and all those good things. They're great things. But it's how you achieve that, I guess, is the question. And that's one of the things I'm kind of trying to explore in a roundabout way with the show. And it's why I love your show, actually, mate, is because I think you come across, to me anyway, as a genuinely thoughtful person who you'll consider views on their merits, not because they're left or right or anything else.
Yeah, well, like I said, the worst hits to my subscriber base is when I've done videos critical of Donald Trump. I actually lose like 100 subscribers overnight. But in some way, I think that they're doing you a favor if they can't listen to a criticism of their God King. Then they're just being they're just barracking for a sports team, really, and that shouldn't be what it's about. I mean, even when your guy gets in, you should be critical of him because you want him to do well and you want him to do the things that he said he's going to do, and so you should be holding their feet to the fire. It's not. People forget that politicians are supposed to work for you. It's not the other way around. You're not supposed to sit there on the sidelines and cheer and go, yeah, you do what you want. No. You're supposed to be implementing the people's will, or at least the people that voted for you. Somehow that gets lost.
There's another thing. Like, I'm professionally and day by day, and what I get paid to do is I'm a coach. So people pay me to give brutally honest feedback. That's basically my role, whether I'm working with a company on a pitch, a commercial pitch, or whether I'm working with an individual who's trying to improve actually any area of their life or business. But my specific niche is coaching around pitching and presenting. But it's feedback. Now, feedback, who was it? Some personal development guru said it, feedback is the breakfast of champions. And he's so right. So why should politicians be any different? Why should any leader or any thinker be any different? And so to me, it's all about feedback. So if you can't give feedback to Christians or to left-wingers or to Muslims or to your political leaders, then we're fucked. I mean, you need to be able to give feedback, and they need to be able to take feedback. This is why the whole thing with Charlie Hebdo and what happened there, to me, is just, well, obviously it's horrific because people died. But what's horrific is that people looking from the outside, people in the media, didn't seem to get that, look, what those people were doing was giving feedback. Charlie Hebdo, as in the cartoonists, are giving feedback, which is quite brutal sometimes, quite cynical or taking the piss. That's their sense of humor. But they're giving feedback to those who have power, whether it be the Catholic Church or whether it be political leaders or whether it be Islam, which has power. All these things have power over people, and they are ripping it out of giving feedback to power. Now, to me, that's so fundamental to any kind of society worth living in. If you can't give feedback, and the people on the other side of that, in inverted commas, power, won't take feedback, that's bad. That really needs to be kicked against. Now, so I'm giving them because they're the most extreme example I can think of, and then obviously a very extreme example of a response came back in that they were machine gunned to death or assault rifled to death. I mean, horrific. But there needed to be downright condemnation of that from everybody in a civilized society, and there blatantly wasn't. That to me is concerning.
That will be looked back on, and the same way that the Danish cartoons. Actually, I think it actually starts with the Danish cartoons, not with Charlie Hebdo, is when every newspaper in the world, with a couple of exceptions of some small ones here and there, perhaps Spiked Online was one of them, would not publish those cartoons, and that is a catastrophic failure. And then you have Charlie Hebdo, and what do we have? Oh, we put lights up on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Some idiot rolls out a piano and sings, a John Lennon song in the streets. We all join hands. I mean, that's absolutely useless. That's as useless as the Women's March on Washington with all these disparate, hey, I pay too much for razor blades, and, you need to pay for my abortions and all the rest of it. Just meaningless claptrap. It's wasted effort, and it does nothing. It is the equivalent to Michelle Obama holding up a hashtag and tweeting it out, save our girls or whatever it is. It's just useless. It's virtue signaling. It's unbelievably arrogant and condescending.
It's also, so before I have to give any obligatory disclaimer about not all Muslims or some of my best friends are Muslim, actually the best man at my wedding converted to Islam. But anyway, the point is, I actually think it's patronizing to Muslims too. To think that they can't or shouldn't be able to handle a bit of a piss take like all the rest of us do in the West. So to me, I have a very strong value around fairness, and to me, why are you patronizing them by assuming they can't take it? I know plenty of Muslim guys who have a bloody brilliant sense of humor and can take a total ripping. Now, if you say, oh well, that's a step too far, ripping out of their religious deity or whatever, well, yeah, but this is where we live. We live in the Western world, and we are allowed to rip out of any deity we like. Go look at Jim Jeffries' Drunk God. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Have you heard? He talks about God drunk at a party, and it's just painfully funny, and it's so right on. And then he has this point in one of his sketches where he says something like, he basically says he won't do it about Islam, and he's like, you think I'm fucking stupid? It's just brilliant.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes back to, perhaps we talked about it on your podcast before, something Douglas Murray said recently, and I think it was October last year in Stockholm, when he said that we sort of take for granted that everyone's for freedom of speech, but actually when you look back through history, they're not. It's only sort of a few people who actually stand up and fight for these things, and this is what's been lost. The historical context of today is that every freedom that you have in the Western world is built on that one freedom of speech. Because if you don't have that freedom, none of the rest of them follow. Because you can't even talk about the other things. I mean, the idea today that we have to protect these, marginalized, if we must use this stupid word, marginalized groups like, I mean, gay people aren't marginalised anymore. They're almost mainstream. They're not queer enough. You know, you've got to be transgender or something else, or non-binary or something weird like that. But just the fact that these marginalised groups, they're the ones who benefited the most from the concept of free speech. If you go back 30, 40 years, 50 years, I mean, what's his name? Alan Turing was put in jail for being gay in the 1960s in UK. Yeah. If it wasn't for the power of free speech for people to stand up and argue for gay rights, then you wouldn't have it today. And yet the exact same people, or at least the people who pretend to be on the side of the marginalised, are the ones who want to suppress it now for others. And that's what I think we talked about it before on your podcast, is that just a lack of historical context. And that's why Brendan O'Neill's such a joy to listen to, because he knows the history, he knows where it comes from. He can quote you the people who wrote about this 200 or 300 years ago and why it's so important. But we don't have that, and sadly we seem to be cutting it out of our education system. And then you have a movement on top of that which says we can't even listen to old white men anyway. We're not even allowed. They should just be cut out of history, and we need to bring in, you know, some marginalised groups or something. It's a really sad state of affairs.
Was Galileo an old white man? I think he might have been, but in his day, which was like the 1500s, wasn't it? That it was a heresy. It was blasphemous to even suggest that heliocentrism.
Yeah.
It was blasphemous and grossly offensive to say that the sun did not orbit the Earth.
Yeah.
So Galileo found himself guilty of speech crime and thought crime, basically, and his book was placed in the index of prohibited books. Now, does that ring any alarm bells for you? Because it certainly does for me. It's like when the British government banned Geert Wilders, he's a whatever someone might think of his views in politics. He's a democratically elected Dutch politician, and he was banned certainly back in 2009 when he was on his way, invited by the House of Lords to come and show and discuss some film he'd made.
It's atrocious.
That kind of behavior in Western democracies, well, it is atrocious, because you can always make an argument for anyone being offensive. Do you know what I mean? From some point of view, pretty much anything could be considered offensive. So if you're going to go down that road, well, the end result of that road can only be a horrific mess and probably brutal violence between groups. Because when you say we can't discuss stuff, what does that lead to? It leads to massive frustrations. And in the end, yeah, I'm afraid it will lead to violence. And I don't like violence personally. I don't believe in interventionist foreign wars, and I don't believe in attacking people unless you're attacked. I do believe in self-defense. But it's going to be bad. It's going to be messy. And I do have a historical context. I have a history degree. I'm fascinated by history. And to me, looking back at history, being pro-gay rights in the 60s in the USA, or being pro-abolition of slavery in the 1700s in Britain, these things were against the law. They were offensive. They were blasphemous.
Yep.
But I personally think we've got to tackle this stuff head on, man. And that's what my show's about. And that's why I love what you're doing. And that's why I love people like Brendan O'Neill. And I was proud to get him on the show too.
Yeah. So
ran over. Sorry.
Yeah. So let's just mention that again. Well, you did mention the name. The name of your podcast is
Write with Courage, as in writer, right?
Yeah.
WRITE. Write with Courage.
Write with Courage. So
it comes from. Sorry, but I was going to say, like, the headline quote for the show is from Oscar Wilde. An idea that is not dangerous isn't really worthy of being called an idea at all.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the central point in my podcast. I'm not saying that all the writers I get, or all the filmmakers, I've had some filmmakers and things as well, I'm not saying they're all really edgy and dangerous. I mean, they're not all that easy to get a hold of. And I'm still working on something. Like, I'm really trying to get Dawkins on the show, and I've been interacting with his PA who's keen, but it's whether we get him convinced. Yeah. So, I'm not always going to get these really dangerous writers on. I'm not going to pretend that. But that's kind of the point of the show, and the more different opinions we can get on there, the better. Yeah.
That's something that idea that you would, the idea of intellectual combat, confrontation, dangerous ideas. Our society has completely moved in the opposite direction, which is to safe space everything. Everything's got to be safe. Yeah. Look at the sort of reaction to the way Trump treats the media, and a lot of his treatment of the media is warranted because they've shown their true colours, and the public doesn't trust them. And now some of his treatment of them is over the top. But the idea that the media and politicians should have a nice, cosy relationship is ridiculous. Yes, there should be communication there. Yes, the president and the administration should communicate what they're doing effectively. It's in their interest to do so. But the idea that relationship between the media and the president should always be a tense one. They should always be, because they can do what most average people can't do, who are just going about their job. They're not in a position to go to White House briefings and hold the president's feet to the fire and ask hard questions. That's what they're supposed to do. It's not supposed to be this cozy relationship where Obama kind of turned it into that. He turned parts of the media into his own sort of PR firm. And I think that's bad. You don't want to get to that relationship. But our entire society, wherever you look, whether it's university campuses, whether it's how we have to remake our workplaces over for women, God forbid they might hear a joke and they'll get offended, and it's sexual harassment. We're becoming so maternal, so protectionist, and I think it's in some ways, I don't know if you've heard Camille Paglia describe this as sort of the end of civilization, the end of I don't know if it's that bad or if that's just a hyperbole, but it seems that way, because once you start to close down and try and protect everything, where does the inspiration come from? Where do the big visions come from? Where do the big ideas come from? That's one of the reasons people don't give Trump credit for. He has, whether he can fulfill them or not, big ideas. He talks big, and it's straight out of the first page of The Art of the Deal. If you haven't read it, folks, I mean that's what he's.
I've read it.
Yeah,
I've read it. That's why I was happy to bet on him winning. I bet at 4-1. I bet $250.
Nice.
But anyway, I think that if there isn't combat in the thought arena, then there will be combat in the real life arena. I'm afraid, and that isn't some well thought through phrase. I genuinely believe that we need. All the way through from at the White House press briefings to any politician. The whole point of the media should be to hold leadership to account. Absolutely, that is what they're for. Now, I don't suspect they did that particularly toughly with Mr. Obama, hence the fact he got away with multiples more illegal drone strikes and killing of not just supposed terrorists, we'll never know because they weren't tried, which I think is despicable, but also thousands of civilians were killed by Obama over those years. Now, I'm not particularly anti-Obama. I'm just saying the media did not hold him as the leader to account. And in that, they failed, and they had 8 years to do that. I know, of course, some of them did, but it was very rare, and it certainly wasn't front-page splash when he did those kind of things, which I'm sure it will be with Mr. T. They're obviously happy to hold him to account, which I fully support.
Yeah.
Good. I mean, do. Rip into him, fill your boots. But it should be combat, like it is with him. It should be like that in every term. The way they've treated him and ripped him to pieces, they should do that with every leader.
Yep.
They shouldn't just choose because one's more right-wing and one's more left-wing. Every leader should be held to account. So I completely agree with you. And as I say, if we're not prepared to debate ideas, where does that lead in the end? I'm afraid it's going to lead to real-life violence in the end, and it will happen, over the course of history. Who knows what will happen? Will it be this year in Europe? Well, it might be because of what's happened in Europe. Will it be 10, 20, 30 years in the future? Maybe, but it's coming unless we change the kind of fundamental grounding go back to more like what we had a number of years ago. Open debate. We need to debate ideas.
Yeah.
Not hide from them. We can't.
But where is the? I guess you might consider yourself there. I might consider myself there. The old sensible centre. It's really not there. Where's the crossing of the aisle? Where's the? I mean, and this is. I watched.
But it is. No, hold on. It is. There are so many millions of people in the UK and America who actually think like you and me, but we don't say anything because we're scared of losing our jobs or upsetting people or putting off clients. It took me years before I got up the courage to start the podcast, even though I'm not out there preaching anything. I'm not preaching anything racist. I'm not preaching anything homophobic. I had the first openly gay Arab Muslim writer on, Abdullah Tai, and yet I was, genuinely scared to get into this world of ideas. But I think you'll find that a heck of a lot of us out there, we're just not saying anything. We're not getting involved because we're scared. But we're there, and the thoughts are still there. So I'm a bit more hopeful than you, I think.
Yeah, well, we had some interesting developments in the last week here in Australia. So Australia Day is the 26th of January. Now, Australia Day is the day that Arthur Phillip landed in Botany Bay, 1788, and sort of planted the flag. It was the first fleet. Now, you had there were some idiots running around Sydney saying, you know, Captain Cook, Invasion Day. It wasn't even Captain Cook. Captain Cook came here in 1770 and landed on Australia and just sort of said, yes, I've discovered it now, even though he wasn't the first one. Captain Cook was dead by 1788. So he was already dead. He caught some disease in the Pacific Islands. I forget, it might have been Hawaii or something, and he died. Something like 1779. So again, there was a complete lack of historical context. People don't even know what they're talking about, some of them. But there's this whole thing around that Australia Day represents Invasion Day. We need to change the day. Now, our national broadcaster, the equivalent of the BBC, which is the ABC in Australia, they've been running with sort of stories that there's a mass consensus growing that we need to change this day. Now, if you go to the most recent poll on this issue, 15% of Australians, 15 believe we should change the day. 85% don't. And yet our national broadcaster, and I wanted to get onto this topic because it speaks to what happens at the BBC, our national broadcaster is pushing a narrative. Now, our national broadcaster is supposed to represent the wide swath of Australia, what they believe. But our national broadcaster is firmly left-leaning, it's pro-refugee, it pushes all these Indigenous rights and things. And there's a clip on the internet that just came out in the last couple of days that on Australia Day they had an Aboriginal academic come on TV. And they basically thought they had a yes man, and they said, so what do you think of these protests? And he went, well, I think it's ridiculous. I think Australia Day's fine on the 26th. I might make a video about this because it's absolutely beautiful. And the presenter, she's just like, and literally good 5 to 8 seconds of pure silence. She just doesn't know what to do because she didn't get the line that she wanted. And so that just speaks to the fact that, is anyone actually conducting journalism? Is anyone doing an interview with someone where they're trying to get an opinion, or are they just trying to get the line that they want to get? And I see this. This is Australia's national broadcaster, as I said, and I see this going on with the BBC all the time as well. Could you give us a line on the BBC?
Well, it's just exactly, I suspect, like you say. I mean, there are certain expectations of certain groups. So if they get, a Sikh gentleman on their show, they are going to make the assumption, let's say Brexit's the topic, they're going to make the assumption that he would have voted to remain part of Europe. Mm-hmm. They just do. And yet I've had a conversation with a Sikh gentleman in the airport in Delhi, actually, and we got chatting, and he was from South London, but he was visiting his grandfather in Bengal. And I said, oh, Bengal, my great-grandfather was part of the 21st Lancers or whatever, this army cavalry regiment that was stationed in Bengal in the British Army. I said, apologies, mate. And he was just laughing and saying, yeah, but he said, did you know that Bengal was the last place the Brits managed to conquer? We were the toughest guys in India. So anyway, he then goes, so, mate, he says, did you vote Brexit or Remain? And I thought, oh, no, here we go. And he could see the look in my eye. But I was obviously worried to say to, inverted commas, an ethnic minority that I'd voted Brexit. And he says, I voted Brexit. And then he gave me this whole great, very well-reasoned description of why he voted Brexit. And he said every other of his Sikh London mates had all voted Brexit. And he said the only person he knew that voted Remain was this white guy that works in the office with him. He worked for the council in South London. And it was this white guy that had voted Remain. And I just think, like, the BBC, they just don't hang out with the working class, so they don't have a clue. Whereas this guy was working class. He was a working class guy, worked for the council. All his mates, including all his fellow Sikh pals, had all voted Brexit. And like a guy I know, I won't go any more detail because I don't want to identify him, but he's a Muslim gentleman from Turkey originally, but has dual citizenship with the UK. He came out to me. He came out quietly over a coffee that he was a Brexiteer, and he was trying to find out if I was. So he's a Muslim Turkish guy with dual citizenship, but he had very sensible reasons for voting Brexit. Now, if either of those two characters had been invited into a TV panel show, you could imagine the shock on the faces of the presenters to discover this. Yeah. So I just think it's so patronizing. It's like what I said earlier on about whether Muslims can, take a bit of a piss take. It's so patronizing to assume that they can't, or to assume that anyone votes in any particular direction because they're gay, straight, lesbian, black. So yeah, identity politics it doesn't work.
No.
That's my basic problem with it. It doesn't work. It's fundamentally patronizing and anti-human nature.
Yeah, I think Brendan
went off on a bit of a rant there, didn't I, mate?
That's yeah. I like rants. I like rants as long as they're coherent ones. I was just watching. Did you see Ashley Judd? Ashley Judd, the actress whose career must be waning, at the Women's March, and her rant. Just incoherent nonsense. What I didn't realize about that rant was that she was reciting a poem written by a young 19-year-old millennial. It was slam poetry, basically. And Ashley Judd was just reciting it. Now, you could probably let the 19-year-old off the hook for not knowing much because she's 19. But Ashley Judd's a 49-year-old woman who should know better. And the whole barrage is just a string of emotional ranting peppered with completely non-factual information. Like, she brings up the wage gap. I mean, it's God, how many times does that have to be shot down, the wage gap? She brings up black, like, she basically says that slavery still exists in America and you can see it in the jails. These kinds of talking points the left has just imbibed. Yeah, like if you go and have a look at this sort of why, of course, yes, black people are disproportionately represented in jails in the United States. Well, there's a reason for that. They don't just go along the street scooping up black people and putting them in jails. They're committing crimes. That's why. That's why they're in there.
Slavery still exists, all right, but not really, as far as I can tell, in the US. Slavery exists throughout the world. I mean, of course, it'll exist to a degree there. There'll be human trafficking and all the rest, but as a societally semi-accepted thing, yeah, it still exists in many countries in the world, and we don't have to go into that. But that's one of those issues where I just think, well, fight your battles. If you're going to have a march on Washington for women's rights, fine. I completely believe in your right to do that, absolutely. But don't tell me that you shouldn't be doing a march on the Saudi embassy as well then.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. Again, it's down to the fairness thing. And the same with slavery. I actually do some work pro bono for a anti-slaving charity because I believe in what they do and how they're doing it. And it is still an issue, yeah. But again, choose your battles. Is it really... Yeah, choose your battles is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Go to the places where it's a major problem and try and do something about it. Fine. Or speak about it. So, like I say, women's rights. Well, is Donald Trump saying something rude in private about groupies or whatever he was saying? Is that an equivalent to how women are treated in Saudi Arabia? Of course it's bloody not. No. So why are we kidding ourselves that that's the thing to march about? Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's just hyperbole. Like, you're going to bring up, black people are still enslaved. Women are earning 65 cents to every dollar if they're black, and even less if they're Latino. It's like, do your homework. But I think I'm in the process of making a video. I don't know how it's going to come out, but it seems that if you are an actor or an actress or a musician or a poet or whatever you want to be, let's just call them artistic. If you take these emotional talking points, which are usually devoid of any kind of factual information, and you dress it up as art, i.e. a poem, and you say it on stage in front of a bunch of people who already think like you, then it gives it some kind of validity or credence. When if you take it apart, which I've sort of been taking apart this poem, I mean, it's all nonsense. It's just crap. None of it's true. It's all emotional. A lot of it's white guilt-ridden virtue signaling to the minorities. Yes, sorry for being white, sorry for my privilege, all this kind of nonsense. It doesn't help anyone. It's all negative. It goes back to what you said. It tells people that they're victims. It tells them that you have low expectations of them, that they can't do anything without their help. They're weak. They're pathetic. That's why I don't think they get why Trump's message cut through, because it wasn't a negative message. It was a positive message. Bring the country together again. Again, whether it's true or not, whether he can do it, whether it was all bullshit, doesn't matter. He had a positive message. That's what cut through. That's what cut
That's
through.
the funny thing, because people accuse him of being racist, but I actually thought my professional work is around messaging, and I actually thought his message was surprisingly non-race based. It was actually a message, like you say, whether it all ends up being bullshit is probably 50-50, but there was a reason why 3 times as many American Muslims voted for him as voted for Romney in 2012, and I think it's because people did hear actually a fairly positive message, whatever color or creed or religion they were. So, yeah, I mean, the numbers speak to that. As far as I remember, he had more of the black vote, more Hispanic vote, right. Certainly the legals. I don't know whether illegals can vote, but and yeah, 3 times as many Islamic Americans voted for him.
And
so
more women.
That has to say something.
And more white women, but not more women overall, but only slightly less women than Obama and more white women. But, I mean, you think about it. I mean, if you're a secular Muslim living in the United States, second generation, you basically acculturated, why do you want to import radical Islamists that want Sharia law into your country? You're going to be against that as well, aren't you? I mean, you mightn't like the rhetoric around it, but if you like the American way of life and you've bought into the ideal, why would you want to import cultures that don't want to assimilate to that? You wouldn't. And it's the same with, I mean, think about he was accused of racism about black people because he said that the black inner cities have been decimated, and that basically the Democrats haven't done anything for them for 40 years. And so he basically said, because as he does, he just speaks plainly, and he said something like, the inner city neighborhoods have, gone to hell. They're awful. They're just, and he didn't mean that in the sense that black people have just completely trashed their own societies. He was saying that, it's a result of successive policies of democratic governments and a failure. And of course, some blame does have to be put on the community itself. But again, it was a positive message. It was saying, look, we're going to really do something about these inner cities. And look at the shit that, who's the comedian guy that came and met with him in Trump Tower for a commitment of...
I missed that.
Yeah.
Who was that? I missed that.
He's a talk show host, black talk show host. He's been around for a long time, comedian. I don't think he's very funny. God damn, I can't think of his name. But he runs one of those...
Not Mike Tyson. Not Mike Tyson. He wasn't a comedian.
No.
But he's just said he's a supporter. I saw him interviewed about it, and the interviewer was basically trying to get him to slag off Trump, and he wouldn't do it, and it started to become quite obvious that he was a Trump supporter.
Yeah.
It was hilarious.
Yeah, well, this guy was... he's a very well-known... in the black community. He's got one of those TV shows that's on in the daytime. It's like The View. It's kind of cringy. The audience is full of women. Basically, he talks about love and relationships and stuff. It's kind of crappy. But
not Montel Williams.
No, goddamn. Yeah. Steve, Jesus Christ. Steve Harvey. Okay. Yeah, if you don't know who that is, once you Google him, you see his face, you'll know exactly who he is. So Steve Harvey goes over to Trump Tower because he genuinely wants to help rehabilitate some inner city areas. And so what happens? He gets labelled a coon. He's an Uncle Tom. You just can't win. Again, it's not about the principle for some of these people. It's about the side. You're on the wrong side. It doesn't matter if you're black, you're gay, or whatever. You're wrong.
So what's the answer then? What's the answer to this? Like, we've been speaking for 45 minutes. What's our own positive answer? So I think it's debate and getting more people to engage with other people's ideas, and that's why I started this show, and that's why I'm starting to speak at debates myself. But what do you think the answer is, mate? Because it's all very well, we can pick holes in, invert commas, the left or regressive leftists. We can pick holes in it all day long, but that's not actually going to help, I suspect. It might feel good, but it's just...
I feel like
verbal masturbation, isn't it? What can we do about it?
I feel like Trump's opened the door to people being less afraid of saying things, but the problem is you've got to not just be yelling the same kind of things that regressives are yelling. So you can't just yell epithets. But I think it's got to start on college campuses that, like what happened in, drawing a blank again, but that Black Lives Matter protest, one of those universities in the South, and something like 40 or 50% of their donors walked away, and they had to close down wings of their university. I mean, I think that's what has to happen, where you have to college groups have to, like whether they're young conservatives or whatever they are on college, have to hold colleges to account. And so if colleges are shutting down groups and deplatforming people, they've got to take these people on. There's organizations like FIRE, for example, that they will take certain court cases on. They've taken on cases of, these kangaroo courts where some guy gets accused of sexual assault. He's out. That's it. It's just a kangaroo court. It's part of that Title IX, lowering the bar on sexual assault on campus. This is violating constitutional rights. They have to stand up for constitutional rights, and they have to get more activist, I think, because, and I'm not in a violent way, but that's part of the problem with what's happened to the right, is that they've kind of just sat back and played the polite yes, and they get shamed into certain positions. They have to stand up for what they believe in, for the principles, and just push back against it. I think college campuses is a place that has to happen in the mainstream media. Hopefully what you and I are doing is part of that. The political leaders have to have more guts as well. They have to recognise, I think Theresa May's done a decent job, I don't know what you think, of actually talking to people, but a lot of our politicians don't talk to people. They're in this sort of liberal enclave of elites, and they look down on the working class, and I don't know, they're moralizing, and we have to get better leadership.
I think the leadership needs to come from the working class personally, and I'm from a very poor working background myself in terms of financial background. I think that's why I love Spiked Online, and I love what they're doing. They do their university free speech rankings, and to me, that kind of model where you go and speak in universities, maybe not what Milo's doing. Well, he's doing his own thing, which is good on him. He's making a stand. I personally am not too keen on a lot of his messaging, the way he does it. But hey, like I say, he's doing a great job in terms of bringing debate on, and so good on him. But I like what you say there about university campuses. That could be the place to start. And I think organizations like Spiked that are deeply of the working class is actually a way to go, because the liberal elites haven't done a very good job in managing things. And I think the working class have a much better appreciation actually for honesty and honest debate. If you've ever worked on a building site, as I have, you know that people aren't, certainly in my experience, people aren't aggressively racist. It's like in the army as well, but they'll use whatever about each other, whether it be ginger hair or whether it be where someone's from or anything else, to rip out of each other. And there's actually something deeply healthy about that. It's not hateful at all. You can tell the difference. Well, I can. I'd like to think I can.
Well, that's
to me, the working class have got some answers, and I think the working class, in conjunction with getting into universities and colleges and maybe even schools, I like what you're saying there. That's got an element of hope in it, because if you can inspire young people to be at least open-minded, which is all I'm talking about. I'm not pushing back from the right. I'm not a right wing, and I believe in the full legalization of all drugs, for example. I believe in gay marriage, and I used to argue against some gay friends of mine when they were saying they shouldn't have the same right to get married. I used to argue for it. So I'm by no means a right winger. So for me, I love what you say there about universities and colleges. I think you could be right there, and I look forward to our Australian campus tour then. When are we doing that?
Well, we have to set up some dates. I think we need a little bit more higher profile, but let's shoot for this year sometime. Let's do that.
We'll get Brendan. We'll get Brendan on the team.
Oh yeah,
he's got a high profile.
He's out here a few times a year, all the time, always speaking. He speaks at the Independent Studies Centre all the time. And people, just for people out there, I mean, if you want to get some more Brendan O'Neill, just Google him. There's 20, 30 speeches of his on the internet, just excellent stuff.
And he got interviewed on my show. Of course, I'll promote my show. He was on Right with Courage a few episodes ago, so well worth a listen. He comes out with some interesting stuff, and you hear about his background, surprisingly working class, as I say.
Yeah, yep.
No, for a guy that's quite obviously intellectual in terms of how he argues, he doesn't have the academic intellectual background. He's just a fierce acquirer of knowledge, and has a thirst for understanding history, the historical context you talk about, and what's really going on in the world. And that to me is one of the things that's so inspiring about him. He's a working class guy in terms of his own working background, and yet he's quite obviously a fantastic debater and guy that can get a point across.
Yeah, and I think our leaders have to see what's going on. I mean, it's the working class that walked out and voted for breakfast. Brexit, and
I'm all for voting for breakfast.
Oh, that's beautiful. The working class, they walked out in America and they voted for Trump. And here we've got the working class walking away from the major parties and going to other parties, and those parties aren't necessarily great, but they're sending a message, and the leaders have to open their ears, or they're going to pay politically. It looks like Geert Wilders might get up in the Netherlands. I think Marine Le Pen's got less of a chance, but it's going to be a very interesting year in politics. And if leaders keep pretending, closing their ears, and keep pretending that everything will be fine and it'll all go away, they're in for a shock. I mean, I don't know how old you are. I'm assuming you're maybe a little younger than me, but I come from working class, and the left in this country, when Margaret Thatcher was in and Reagan was in the early 80s, we had a change of government here to our left Labour Party. In 1983, Bob Hawke was elected. Now, they did and instituted the same type of policies, not all neocon policies, but they floated the dollar, they deregulated, they privatised, they made industry more competitive. They saw business as the way to drive the economy. In Australia today, as compared to the early 1980s, the standard of living has just shot through the roof. Today's left does not, in Australia, and I want to get your opinion on the left in England just before we get out of here, under Corbyn. Today's left in Australia does not talk the language of the working class that Bob Hawke and Paul Keating did in Australia 30 years ago. They don't, and the working class don't trust them, and the working class, to a large extent, won't vote for them, except for the people who believe in unions. But the unions have shown themselves to be cronies in the last few years. And I just wonder how you think the left used to talk for the working class, and to my mind, when I look at Jeremy Corbyn and the people he surrounded himself with, they don't look like they speak for the working class. They look like sort of latte-sipping London snobs.
It's been quite a while since the Labour Party spoke for the working class, and I'll give you a little example from my own family history. So I said I'm from a very poor financial background and a working background. I am, but on one side of the family, I had a posher, a more aristocratic type kind of slant in the family. Not necessarily a lot of money around, but just in terms of background. And this particular grandmother, who was quite a posh English lady, she once said to me when Tony Blair had been in power for a couple of years, she said, "You know what?" She said, "Tony Blair is the best Conservative Prime Minister we've had for quite a while." So I don't actually, I mean, obviously some of his policies weren't Conservative, but I think people speaking for the working class politically, that's been quite a while since the Labour Party have been doing that effectively. And I'm sure they've tried, and I'm pretty sure that their heart's in the right place in terms of they would like to be the voice of the working class, but I don't think they are, because most of them don't seem to be working class.
No.
If you're from the middle class and you've had a fairly moneyed upbringing and you've never wanted for anything, and it's probably pretty hard to appreciate how the working class feel when however many million folk come in from Poland, for example. Now, by the way, before anyone has a crack at me, I'm quarter Polish. My grandfather was Polish, so speaking as a Polish person, and also I own properties which are often rented out by Polish people, so it's in my interest for more of them to come. But all I'm saying is, if you are working class, let's say you're a plumber or a joiner, and suddenly there are 3 Polish plumbers in the same village as you in Norfolk, in the east of England, and weirdly, you've got less work and you can't charge the rates you could anymore. Well, how do you feel about that? Well, I'll tell you how the Labour Party felt. They couldn't give a monkeys. They just could not care less. Yeah. And so you, as that working class plumber or joiner, you soon realise that the Labour Party don't care about you and don't speak for you anymore.
Yep.
So no, I think England, so I'm not in England, I'm in Scotland, and it's different again up here, but I think in England, Labour have got their work cut out. I honestly don't know how they'll bring it back in terms of genuinely capturing the working class vote. So I'm not always one for predictions, but I can't see them getting into power at the next election. I think it'll be another Conservative walkthrough, and UKIP just don't seem to be able to get it together to have real electoral success. Yeah, they get the numbers, but in terms of how our system works, they don't really seem to be able to get the MPs. Yeah. So I can't see them having much success either. Scotland's different again. The SNP, despite having been in power for a long time and not necessarily having been that successful, they're fantastic communicators.
Yeah.
Nicola Sturgeon's. I was at an event with her speaking recently, and she's good, man. She's really good. She really can win people over, and yeah, it's interesting times. I mean, they are basically a socialist government, and they're, I guess, I don't know enough about the finances to know, but they, I guess, are able to keep the standard of living pretty high up here because, is it the Barnett formula? It's called. They actually, as far I'm straying into territory I shouldn't here, but let's just say I don't see the SNP getting booted out of power up here anytime soon.
Yeah.
So it is different up here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're to the left of Labour probably, and yet they've been in power for a long time up here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, mate. Maybe we'll leave it there. We ran up 55 minutes pretty quickly. Always good.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Well, it's tough. You throw these things up on YouTube, and when they're over 15 minutes long or 20 minutes long, people don't seem to want to watch them. And that's probably something to do with myself not being that interesting sometimes. But you are definitely interested.
Snip it up.
Yeah. Well, I could do that.
Snip it up. Couldn't you snip it into 3 or 4 bits about different topics? We must have talked about different themes.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe not.
We'll see. Well, I'll see how this comes out when we get off. Anyway, I want to thank you for coming on, and we'll cut it off here. And just one more time, just give a shout out where people can find you.
So my home site is where you'll find the podcast and various other bits and pieces I'm up to. www. Then my name, Thor, Thor, Holt, HOLT.com, thorholt.com.
Okay, I'll put that in the description.
And cool. You'll obviously find the podcast at iTunes, Stitcher Radio, SoundCloud, and that's Right With Courage.
Mm-hmm. Good one. All right, mate.
Oh, and if you want free coffees, just go to YouTube and look up Thor Holt TEDx, and you'll find the TED talk I gave about getting yourself free coffee, among other things.
Good one. Thanks, man. Thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Great talking to you.